All right, everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. This time, we're heading straight into the heart of the JFK assassination.
Always a fascinating topic, right?
Absolutely. And today's journey is going to take us through some newly released records from, get this, the Fourth Decade Journal.
Oh, yeah, I've heard of that. It's like a whole treasure chest of information for JFK researchers, right?
It is. Think fresh perspectives, updates on key players, and I'm not even kidding, some crazy coincidences that make you wonder if it's all just, like, fate or something.
Yeah, I know what you mean. Like those things where you just go, no way, that can't be just a coincidence.
That's exactly what we're dealing with today. We're going to try and untangle the mystery of Lee Harvey Oswald, put together those pieces of his life leading up to the assassination.
Sounds like a challenge, but a good one.
And thankfully, as always, I've got our expert here ready to help us connect the dots and figure out what it all means.
Well, I'll do my best. Let's jump in, shall we?
Let's do it. Okay, first things first, the coup d'etat theory. We've all heard it, right? This idea that high-level government folks were the masterminds behind JFK's death. But in this issue of the Fourth Decade, Ken Thompson's article kind of throws a wrench in that idea.
Interesting. So is he saying there wasn't a cover-up at all?
Well, not exactly. Thompson's not denying that things got, let's say, a little messy after the assassination.
Okay, but then what's his point?
He's arguing that a cover-up doesn't automatically mean a coup. Like, imagine the chaos after the shooting. Fear, grief, maybe even just good old bureaucratic panic.
Right, like covering their own butts.
Exactly. So Thompson's saying that those kinds of reactions could lead to actions that look super suspicious, even if they weren't part of some master plan to kill the president.
I see. So like a chain reaction of mistakes and cover-ups, not necessarily a deliberate plot from the start.
Precisely. It's all about motive, right? Things might look conspiratorial on the surface, but that doesn't automatically point to a coup d'etat.
Okay, that makes sense. But how does he explain, like, the illegal removal of JFK's body from Texas without a proper autopsy? That's pretty irregular, to say the least.
Right. It definitely raises eyebrows. But Thompson argues that it could have been driven by, like, raw emotion in the aftermath of the assassination. Think about it. The First Lady losing her husband, the whole country in shock.
Yeah.
Maybe things weren't handled by the book, but not necessarily for sinister reasons.
Okay, yeah, I can see that. Grief can make people do things they wouldn't normally do.
Exactly. And what about the FBI intimidating witnesses? That's a fact, right?
Oh, absolutely. And Thompson suggests that, well, knowing J. Edgar Hoover, it could just be his style. You know, that whole aggressive FBI approach he was known for.
Right. Hoover was intense, to say the least. So, again, suspicious actions, but maybe not part of some grand conspiracy.
Okay, so then what about the Zapruder film? There's all this debate about whether it was tampered with, right?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And Thompson says if there was tampering, it might have been to cover up Secret Service blunders, not evidence of a coup.
So potentially trying to hide their own mistakes rather than some massive plot.
Right. Makes you think twice about jumping to conclusions, doesn't it?
It does. But what about the evidence that does seem to support the coup d'etat theory? Like Joseph Miltier predicting the assassination just weeks before. That's hard to ignore, right?
Well, you're telling me. And Thompson doesn't try to dismiss that. He acknowledges it's a strong piece of evidence, but he says it points to some kind of conspiracy, not necessarily one orchestrated by the government.
Interesting. So he's suggesting there might be other forces at play.
Exactly. He's urging us to consider all the other pre-assassination events, the threats, the weird stuff happening around that time.
To not just focus on the most obvious explanation, but to follow the evidence wherever it leads?
You got it. Don't automatically blame the whole Washington power structure. Look deeper, be a little more skeptical.
That's a good point. So if not a coup d'etat, what other explanations are we left with?
That's the big question, isn't it? And these new records offer some pretty interesting clues. We've got updates on a bunch of individuals connected to the assassination, some of which could totally change our understanding of what happened.
Okay, now you've really got my attention. Tell me more.
All right, buckle up. We're starting with Samuel Mac Pate.
Pate, that name rings a bell.
He was a KBOX radio employee in Dallas, and his stories about what he was doing on November 22nd, well, they changed quite a bit over time.
Really? That's suspicious.
And here's the kicker. His name is almost identical to another key player, Mac Pate, the garage owner who reported seeing a suspicious Oswald lookalike after the shooting.
Whoa, hold on. So two guys with almost the same name, both connected to the assassination in different ways.
You see why I said these records are full of coincidences? Pure chance. Maybe. But makes you think, right?
Definitely. Okay, so what about the Samuel McPay? What's so fishy about his story changing?
Well, for one, there's that 4 days that shocked the world record album.
I remember that.
Mhm.
Supposedly had real audio from the assassination scene.
Right, but guess what? Payday later admitted most of it was recreated.
So, not authentic recordings after all.
Not quite. And the FBI and the Warren Commission spent ages trying to track down those original recordings from that day.
And did they find them?
That's the mystery. The fact that Payday reconstructed them raises all sorts of questions. Like, was he trying to hide something? Change the narrative?
And every little detail just adds another layer of intrigue to this whole thing.
I know, right? Okay, ready for another curveball? This one involves a woman named Heed Massing.
Heed Massing. Never heard of her.
You're in for a treat. She was a longtime FBI informant, but get this, also a CIA informant. Talk about playing both sides.
Wow, that's like something straight out of a spy movie. What was she informing about?
She reported on conversations with people who believed Fidel Castro was behind the assassination. But here's the crazy part. The information she gave to the FBI and the CIA, it was different.
Wait, so she was telling different stories to different agencies.
Yep. Makes you wonder what her game was, right? Was she intentionally misleading one or both of them? Or was she just caught in a web of misinformation?
Man, talk about murky motives. Makes you realize how easily information could be manipulated back then, especially in a case like this.
Absolutely. Okay, moving on to a figure we've discussed before, Bardwell Odom.
Odom. Wasn't he the FBI agent who might have been connected to Oswald?
That's the one. We talked about that possible link through a name and number in Oswald's notebook.
Mhm.
Well, these new records throw another name into the mix, Lee Odom.
And who's this Lee Odom?
His post office box number was found in Clay Shaw's notebook.
Wait, Clay Shaw, as in the guy Jim Garrison investigated, the one he claimed was part of a conspiracy?
Yep, that's the one. But wait, it gets even weirder.
Oh, I'm sure it does. Go on.
The night before the assassination, a woman named Mary Frances Odom was stopped by police in Oklahoma.
Okay. And
He was acting strangely and claimed something terrible was going to happen to JFK in Dallas.
whoa, like she had a premonition or something.
Right. And now researchers are trying to figure out if this Mary Frances Odom was related to Lee Odom or Bardwell Odom.
So we've got a potential link between Oswald, Odom, and Shaw. And now this woman, possibly related to one or both Odoms, who seems to have foreseen the assassination.
It's a lot to untangle, right?
It really is. So are we saying Bardwell Odom, the FBI agent, knew about the assassination beforehand?
Well, we can't see that for sure. But these connections, even if they're just loose threads, definitely raise some big questions.
No kidding. It's like 6 degrees of separation, but with like way higher stakes.
Exactly. We're just scratching the surface. Remember those attempts to connect Oswald to the Friends Service Center in Mexico City? And that student, Arnold Kessler.
Oh yeah, that whole thing was wild. What happened with that?
New evidence just straight up debunks those claims. Turns out Kessler wasn't even in Mexico City when Oswald was there.
So that connection's busted. What about that mysterious memo? The one hinting at a Chinese communist connection to the assassination.
The B. Wiseman memo.
Yeah.
That's still a head-scratcher.
I remember that. Nobody could figure out who B. Wiseman actually was.
Right. They're still trying to nail down the author's identity. The signature's unclear. And there's a chance it was actually supposed to be Bernard Wiseman, a totally different guy.
So we have this potentially explosive memo, but we don't even know who wrote it. Classic JFK, right?
Totally. It's like, was this a real warning about a conspiracy or just someone messing with the investigation?
It's enough to make your head spin.
Tell me about it. But that's not all these records have in store for us. We've got some pretty scathing critiques of certain theories and even some of the people involved in the investigation.
Oh, juicy. Give me the dirt.
Well, this next one really throws the lone gunman theory into question, and it gets pretty personal.
Okay, hit me with it. I'm ready for anything at this point. All right, so this next one, it's about Gerald Posner. You know, the guy who wrote Case Closed?
Yeah, big defender of the lone gunman theory, right?
Right. Well, Harrison E. Livingstone, he wrote a pretty scathing critique of Posner in this issue.
Oh, I remember Livingstone. He doesn't hold back, does he? What's he saying this time?
He's calling Posner a fraud, basically. Says he twists the evidence to fit his narrative.
Fraud? That's a pretty serious accusation. Does he back that up?
He does, yeah. He takes issue with a lot of Posner's claims, especially about the autopsy.
Oh, yeah, that whole debate about whether the Kennedy family influenced the autopsy procedures.
Exactly. Livingstone says Posner downplays that whole aspect. And then there's the whole thing about the sanitized autopsy photos.
Sanitized. What does that even mean?
Livingston suggesting there might be altered or even missing photos, photos that can tell a different story than the official one.
Hmm, interesting. So basically, Livingston's accusing Posner of cherry-picking evidence to support the lone gunman theory.
Yeah, that's the gist of it. Oh, and he also brings up the disappearance of JFK's brain.
Right. That's always been a big mystery. Where did it go?
Livingstone sees it as another piece of the puzzle that points to a cover-up.
Okay, but why would Posner, or anyone, go to such lengths to defend the lone gunman theory? Like, what's the motive?
Well, Livingstone has a theory about that, too. He thinks Posner's whole focus on Robert Kennedy's alleged involvement in plots against Castro is a way to smear the Kennedy family.
To distract from what really happened, you mean?
That's what Livingstone argues, yeah.
It's almost like we're watching a battle of interpretations play out, you know? Like, who do you believe? Whose version of the story is more convincing?
It is, yeah. It just goes to show you how much passion this case still evokes all these years later. It's fascinating, but also frustrating, right?
Totally. It's a good reminder that history is always told from a certain perspective. Makes you wonder if we can ever really know what really happened.
Yeah, you really have to be careful about who you're getting your information from, what biases they might have.
Speaking of different perspectives, Livingstone's argument about Posner trying to distract from the truth kind of reminds me of another case that gets tangled up with the JFK assassination. The murder of Karen Kupcinet.
Oh, yeah, I remember hearing about that. Wasn't she the daughter of a Chicago TV host?
Yep, that's her. Sheldon Inkle wrote a letter to the editor about her in this issue. He was really intrigued by the case.
I can see why. It's a pretty mysterious one, and some people even try to link it directly to the JFK assassination.
Really? What's the connection?
Well, the rumor started flying that Kupcinet predicted JFK's assassination, and then she was murdered just 2 days later, like someone was trying to silence her.
Wow, talk about a conspiracy theory. Sounds like something straight out of a movie.
Right. But when Inkle dug a little deeper, he found some holes in that story.
Oh, like what?
Turns out the timeline of her death doesn't match up with the assassination at all. There's no evidence to support that prediction story.
So more like a case of people connecting dots that weren't really there?
Pretty much, yeah.
So if she didn't predict the assassination, what did happen to her?
Well, that's still a bit of a mystery, but Inkle did uncover some interesting details.
Like what?
She was involved in a pretty messy romantic relationship, and there were also a bunch of fake death threats she was dealing with.
Fake death threats, like someone was trying to scare her.
Yeah, it seems that way. So Inkle thinks her murder might have been more personal, not connected to the JFK assassination at all.
Okay, so another case of coincidence, not necessarily meaning causation. Just because something happens around the same time as the JFK assassination doesn't mean it's related.
Right, exactly. It's easy to get caught up in all the conspiracy theories and start seeing connections everywhere, but it's important to take a step back and look at the evidence objectively.
Definitely. Okay, last but not least, we have to talk about Oswald's employment records. Or, well, the lack of them, I guess.
Yeah, that's always been a weird one. Like, how do you just lose track of those kinds of documents?
Right, especially for someone like Oswald, who was at the center of such a huge event. In this issue, William Weston has a letter to the editor where he delves into those missing records.
Oh, this should be good. What did he find?
Well, he focuses on Oswald's alleged employment at the Pfister Dental Laboratory. The dates are all messed up. They conflict with Oswald's Marine Corps records.
So something's not adding up.
Right. And because of that, Weston proposes a pretty radical theory.
Okay, I'm on the edge of my seat here. What's the theory?
He thinks there might have been two Oswalds.
Two Oswalds? Like twins or something?
Yeah, that's what he's suggesting.
I mean, I've heard some wild theories about the JFK assassination, but that's up there with the best of them. What's the evidence for that?
Well, it's not so much about direct evidence as it is about what's missing.
Okay, explain that to me.
So the W-2 form for Pfister, the one that should prove Oswald worked there, looks like it was faked.
A fake W-2. So someone was trying to make it look like he worked there when he didn't.
It seems that way.
Yeah.
And then other records from the Social Security Administration are either missing or look like they've been tampered with.
So if these employment records are bogus, what does that tell us about Oswald? Was he leading some kind of double life? Was someone trying to create a false trail for him?
That's what we're left wondering, isn't it? It's almost like we know less about him now than we did before.
It's true. It makes you think, who went to all this trouble to mess with Oswald's past? And why? It's like they wanted us to focus on a certain narrative, but we don't know what that narrative is supposed to be.
It's like the whole deep dive has been like that.
Mm.
One twist and turn after another, more questions than answers.
Yeah, that's the JFK assassination for you. The more you learn, the deeper the mystery gets.
But there's something about it that keeps us coming back, you know?
Yeah.
We just have to try and make sense of it all, even if we know the complete truth might always be out of reach.
It's true. It's like this giant puzzle, and we're all trying to fit the pieces together, even if some of them are missing or broken.
And these records, they've added some interesting new pieces, that's for sure.
Definitely. And even if we don't have all the answers, I think we've learned a lot about the complexity of this case.
We have. And about how tricky it can be to uncover the truth about historical events.
Exactly. But before we get too deep into the philosophy of history, I think our listeners are probably waiting for that grand takeaway, that final piece of the puzzle.
So what is it? What have we learned from all of this?
A grand takeaway. Honestly, I think the biggest thing we've learned today is that there might not be a grand takeaway. Like maybe there isn't a single answer that explains everything about the JFK assassination. You know what I mean?
So you're saying we might never find that one missing piece that completes the puzzle? That
I really
the
so.
truth is messier than that?
I think that's a real possibility. We've seen so many contradictions, missing pieces, and things that just don't make sense. It makes you wonder if we'll ever fully understand what happened in Dallas that day.
So are we just supposed to give up, accept that the truth is unknowable?
No, I wouldn't say that. I think it's more about recognizing the limits of what we can know. We're talking about events that happened decades ago, evidence gets lost, memories fade, people reinterpret things to fit their own narratives.
So it's not about giving up, it's about being realistic.
Right. And being okay with the fact that we might never have all the answers.
I guess that's part of what makes the JFK assassination so fascinating, right? It's this constant search for truth, even if we know we might never fully find it.
Exactly. It's a mystery that keeps unfolding no matter how much we learn.
And it makes you think about all the other mysteries in history, all the unanswered questions. Maybe there are some things we're just not meant to know.
Maybe. But I think it's important to keep asking those questions anyway. Keep searching, keep exploring, keep challenging the official narratives.
Because even if we never find all the answers, the act of searching can teach us a lot about ourselves, about how we understand the world, about how we make sense of the past.
Well said. And that's why the fourth decade is so important, right? It keeps those questions alive, keeps people thinking critically, keeps the investigation going.
It does. So to all our listeners out there, don't be afraid to dive deep, question everything, explore those alternative theories. You never know what you might find.
And you might just uncover a piece of the puzzle that no one else has seen before.
Exactly. And if you do, please share it with us. We're always hungry for more information, more perspectives, more pieces of the puzzle.
Always.
Well, that about wraps up our deep dive into the world of JFK assassination records. Thanks for coming along for the ride. Until next time, keep those minds curious and those archives open.